Welcome to 80/20 Estate Planning, the show that explains smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, with your host, Al Gibbons. In this 13-week series, Mr. Gibbons and his guests will be discussing a multitude of critical and helpful topics, including his own 80/20 process. Feel free to call in with your questions, 621-WALE or 1-877-621-WALE. Now, 80/20 Estate Planning with Al Gibbons.
Welcome to 80/20 Estate Planning. This is Al Gibbons. Welcome to our listeners and to two great guests that I have with me today. We're talking about estate planning, and this is our 11th show in a 13-part series. Today I have with me Mr. Scott Small from Mellon, headquartered in Pittsburgh and currently working in Philadelphia. Scott's a graduate of the University of Michigan and a graduate of the University of Florida School of Law. Scott is vice president with Mellon Private Asset Management, acting as a regional manager of the Estate Settlement Unit for Mellon's Mid-Atlantic region, which includes Eastern PA, Southern New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. Scott is a lawyer admitted to practice law both in Pennsylvania and Florida, and is a frequent lecturer and author. Member of the Philadelphia Estate Planning Council. He's also a former member of the Allegheny County Probate and Trust Council. Scott, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon, Al.
Also, we have with us one of the really great professionals in Philadelphia area and a good friend of mine, Mr. Denny Urffer. Dennis Urffer is a shareholder in Resnick, Amsterdam, Leshner, PC, certified public accountants, and he is chairman of the Estate and Gift Tax Department. Denny is an a member of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, the Pennsylvania Institute, the PICPA, Philadelphia Chapter Cooperation with the Bar Committee, and the Philadelphia Chapter Management Advisory Committee. Denny has made several presentations, including CPAs serving as fiduciaries, trustees, and executors. He has also talked about estate planning for the business owner and tax traps regarding individual retirement accounts. Denny, welcome. Nice to have you with us.
Great to be here, Al.
Great. Today we are going to talk about estate administration. We've been talking about estate planning, and today we want to talk about what goes on toward the end of the estate planning process. And when I say estate administration, Denny, well, what does that mean to you?
Basically, that means probating the will, paying all the debts, distributing all the assets to the beneficiaries, and basically doing what is required to have the wishes of the decedent carried out. Okay.
And Denny, when we're talking about that, usually in estate planning, and we talked about this on a previous show that we've done, we know that there is an executor for an estate. And how do you deal with that executor? What are sort of the important issues that you have with the executor?
Actually, I have a meeting coming up this coming Monday with a new executor, and one of the things I always like to lay the groundwork for is outlining that person's responsibilities and requirements for this process, so that they understand really their duties, and emphasizing in that that they need to have all and use all the other professionals in the team, the attorney, myself, the accountant, yourself, the life insurance agent, the broker, appraisers, etc. So that it really is a team approach that makes the estate administration work more smoothly. And hopefully there's been good estate planning prior, so that always helps in the process of the estate administration also.
Just to follow up on what Denny's saying, I typically, Al, would break down the responsibilities of an executor into 6 broad categories. custody and valuation, locating, valuing, and assuming custody of all the assets, whether that be a herd of buffalo, free houses scattered around the world, or just bank accounts, dealing with creditors, investment management of the assets that are had, record keeping, which is very important from both a legal and an accounting standpoint, obviously taxation, and then finally distribution.
Well, let me ask a question, Denny. When you're talking about dealing with the executor, and Scott, you're dealing with this every day also.
I am the executor.
Right. Do you need to make clear, Denny, to this executor that you're talking about with that they can use other professionals? Because remember, the person who was really the focus of this estate planning has named executors but hasn't necessarily named a team. Is the executor able to hand off things to other professionals? Absolutely.
You have to keep in mind that the executor has a lot of responsibility, and he wants to make, he himself, having that fiduciary responsibility, wants to make sure that he gets appropriate professional guidance.
And so, Scott, let me ask you a question. Well, what is this term fiduciary responsibility? What does that mean?
Well, fiduciary responsibility is a responsibility that is higher than one that, say, you and I would deal with in our ordinary business dealings. There's a famous quote from a Supreme Court judge a number of years ago that says, "It is not merely an honor, but the punctilio of an honor that you have to abide by." I mean, you have to be so straight-laced and so responsible about it. It's like a second job. It is one that is very demanding, very time-consuming, with a high learning curve and a certain degree of risk.
So it seems to me then that there is a strong case that could be made for either, or perhaps and, having your normal executor and also a corporate executor or...
well, certainly some sort of professional. I mean, the first line, if somebody is named as an executor, the first thing that I would advise them is get help. It can be an accountant, it can be a qualified financial planner, an attorney, a corporate fiduciary such as the entity that I work with, but get help, because it is, I mean, I've known many lawyers that have come to the other side and said, it was far more complicated than I ever realized. I had no idea what to expect. And furthermore, everything that you do can and will be second-guessed by beneficiaries, creditors, etc.
So, Denny, if lawyers say it was harder than they thought, or other professionals that you would even know would say it was harder than they thought, then surely a layman would think that this could be could find that this is a daunting experience.
Oh, absolutely.
So then is part of your job to hold that person's hand and get them through the process? Is that how you try to work with an executor?
Yes, it's really trying to educate, step by step, the executor, and usually what happens in the first meeting, there's so much information that is presented to the executor that they can only possibly remember, like 1/3, if not less than that. So you always have to be reinforcing, what they need to be handling, what they need to do. And one thing that I want to mention in this, we talked about, the need of professionals, and I often advise in the estate planning process for my clients to really name in a letter form, not necessarily part of any official document, but at least in a letter form, who they would advise their executor to seek help in, the accountant, the attorney, and so forth, that they would suggest using.
Okay, good. Now, Scott, you outlined the 6 duties or 6 areas for an executor, and it seems to me that under each of those areas we could have 6 or 60 different things that would take place.
Absolutely.
Is it typical, Scott, when you work with clients in this regard, do you almost have to keep a checklist? I mean, how administratively do you not forget some of the details?
Well, I think any executor, any professional executor worth his, her, or its salt certainly has a very extensive checklist, one stretching on multiple pages to get not only the high points but also the little nitpicky things like little legal notices that have to be filed within 3 months that said that you notified the beneficiaries, and notices to attorneys general when there are charitable gifts being made and things like that. They're writing a letter to the Department of Public Welfare to find out whether the decedent received any medical assistance payments. You know, and I'm just scratching, obviously, the surface of some of the little things that can very easily slip through.
And Denny, when we're talking about that stuff and all these little cracks or potential cracks that things can fall through, and the checklist and so forth, how does someone determine when it's necessary to hire someone? Is it due to the size of the estate? Is it due to, do even small estates have to worry about these issues, or the executors, or is there some kind of break, for an executor or for an estate that, really doesn't have that much in it?
Well, the problem is that a layperson really wouldn't know the first thing about doing even a small estate. The complexity usually isn't that much different for a small estate than a large estate, other than the numbers are bigger in the larger estate. Oftentimes you're going to have the same types of assets, generally speaking. So, and you also have the fiduciary responsibility to the beneficiaries, which is going to be theoretically the same, other than you don't have as much exposure dollar-wise.
Danny, don't you often find that the larger the estate, the more sophisticated the help that has gone into it, and thus easier it is to administer, where the smaller estates, there hasn't been as much thought, and those are even more difficult to administer?
They definitely can be, because then, no one has really thought about it beforehand. So,
Scott, down at Mellon, which really is a big, successful institution, and in private asset management, you can have some minimums. Let's face it, you're not dealing with $100,000 estates. So you have the client picture that you have. Denny or others that would like to be like Denny might have general accounting practices, might have a lot of different profiles in there, and may have some smaller estates to deal with. How do you charge? Denny, if you have to do all that work and it's the same for it could be the same for a small estate or even more complicated than for a big estate, doesn't cost become prohibitive?
It definitely can. My fees are based on an hourly. I do not get involved in a percentage of the estate.
Right.
But the hourly rate, of course, is not inexpensive.
Right.
And yes, there is a breaking point where the percentage is probably end up being the same dollar amount as the hourly.
Right.
So
on the other hand, the cost of a mistake can also be substantial. If the people try to do it themselves.
Yes.
I want to talk about this a little bit more. I think this is an important distinction that we'd like our listeners to know a little bit about. So on the other side, let's come back and talk a little bit about the practicality and when you use professionals. I'm getting an idea that this is a very important issue. So let's come back right after the break and talk about that.
Sounds good.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 Estate Plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes, from A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at Al Gibbons at algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940. Or email algibbons at algibbons.com.
Money. It's just not what it used to be. Among other things, it's younger. But new money and old money have at least one thing in common. Phoenix, a company that's been helping people manage wealth for nearly 150 years. Phoenix understands that making money and knowing what to do with it are two very different skills. Call 1-888-456-3451 or visit us at phoenixwm.com. We could bring harmony to your life, if not to your music. Today's money. It's not just who you are, it's what you're made of. It's not just having a name, it's making one. Not just being, but creating. In fact, 8 out of 10 today's millionaires aren't inheriting their money, they're earning it. That's not just evolution, that's revolution. And one company understands how money has changed, and that company is Phoenix. Call 1-888-456-3451 or visit us at phoenixwm.com, because money is not what it used to be.
It seems that everyone is trading, buying, and banking online these days. To keep up with the pace, you'll need the proper information and some solid and objective advice. That's where Tom Perbillo comes in. Tom's the host of a show here on WALE called the E-Financial Advisor. You can tune in to Tom every Thursday morning at 10 and get the scoop on what's going on in the e-financial world today. With more than 25 years of financial counseling under his belt, Tom knows what you need to keep up the pace and get ahead and prepare for retirement. That's the E-Financial Advisor, Tom Perbillo, Thursdays at 10 a.m. here on 990 a.m. Check it out. You might learn something.
Make sure you tune in every Tuesday from 8 to 9 a.m. for Take It to Heart with Dr. Libby Skidmore. Clinical psychologist and inspirational speaker, Dr. Skidmore addresses the mental health issues that concern you most. Real-life issues like depression, anxiety, and stress overload. This lively, interactive call-in show will educate, encourage, and enlighten you. So take heart, there is hope. Join us Tuesday mornings from 8 to 9 a.m. for Take It to Heart with Dr. Libby Skidmore, right here on Your Talk Alternative, 990 WALE.
Talk to our expert host. In the Providence area, call 621-WALE. Outside the Providence area, call toll-free, 1-877-621-WALE.
And now back to 80/20 Estate Planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
Leshner. Welcome back. This is Al Gibbons, 80/20 Estate Planning, with my guest, Scott Small, from Mellon Private Asset Management in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Dennis Urffer, CPA, shareholder in Resnick, Amsterdam, and Leshner. Welcome back, gentlemen. I would like to pick up our conversation. We were talking about the cost of settling an estate administration, and bringing in professionals to do that. And one of the things that Scott brought up is this fact that it may actually, in some cases, be much more complicated and much more difficult to settle a small estate and get through the process than some of the larger ones because of the planning that was done up front. Let's go back to that, Scott. As I mentioned before the break, you can set some minimums. The Mellon Private Asset Management can set some minimums. How does that work in Mellon?
Sure.
What are your minimums for?
Well, typically what we have is each financial institution in this area will have a standard schedule of rates. and with minor discrepancies between them because we're all in the same business and we're looking at each other's schedules. But typically, I would think you'd see somewhere in the 5 to 4% range for the first $500,000 to $1 million, and then 3% or 2% for each million thereafter. So yeah, you start off a little higher at the front end because of all the common things that you do. Mellon's minimum fee is $10,000, which means we accept estates of $200,000 and up. Okay, so Scott, let me ask you a question. If you had a minimum fee of $10,000 and you did that, and then you put that with a minimum size estate that you were settling at $200,000, right? That is a 5% fee at that point. Now, there are some, I'm sure, among our listeners who might think that that is an excessively high fee. Do you think it is? And do you think, if it's not, that it is indeed worth it to a client potentially to use someone like Mellon and yourself to perform these services? It's not a high fee for several reasons. One is that it not only takes into account the hours spent and a reasonable billing rate, but also takes into account the liability, the potential fiduciary liability. If something goes wrong, if a stock drops or we hold it for too long or we don't get a particular price, I mean, it's dollar for dollar. We have to reach into our pocket and reimburse, it's called surcharge, reimburse the beneficiaries. But more importantly is the peace of mind that a corporate fiduciary or any professional brings to bear along those lines, that they know the job is in safe hands. We don't die, we don't get sick, we don't go old, we don't go on vacation, we don't take the money and run, we know what we're doing, and God forbid something goes wrong, we're in deep pocket. Yeah, interesting. Denny, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, once you sit down with the executor and outline everything that needs to be accomplished, I think, the fee gets to be a secondary issue. It's usually not an issue any longer because they recognize that, first of all, they wouldn't have the personal capabilities of making sure everything is done properly, and they are relieved that someone else is there to help out. And I often had, the executors after everything, or family members after everything was said and done, really, thank you for and appreciate what you have accomplished for them. Mm-hmm.
One last point on that is that once the person has died, the estate planning is not necessarily over. There are a number of structural, format, and frankly specific estate planning, post-mortem estate planning things that can be done to maximize deductions for beneficiaries, to defer the payment of taxes for as long as possible, such that we're possibly recouping a chunk of our fees that we're charging. And we know how to do that, where a layperson won't know how to do that. So give me an example, Scott, where, I don't know if you can think of a sort of a scenario that you've had in the last year or so, where it may actually be that a technique able to employ in post-mortem estate planning has more than outstripped the fee. Does that happen? Well, it certainly happens. I mean, Denny can speak to disclaimers, which is a estate planning process which takes place within 9 months of death, wherein if the documents aren't set up right or they need to shift assets over in order to equalize an estate between the surviving spouse and the first spouse to die, that can save hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, Denny, you are an accountant.
Yes.
And do you file the tax returns when you're working with these people?
Yes, we do.
So that means that you know what people are being charged taxes for, and with strategies, then you may be able to avoid a couple of those situations or reduce the tax. Is that true?
That is true.
And can you think of any situation where your strategies have basically paid the fee and perhaps more?
Well, one of the other things...
I'm sorry, catching you off guard. I'm just trying to think if anything comes to mind.
Yeah, one thing that you always have to keep in mind is, under the current law with the step-up in basis, looking at valuing the assets at the date of death which can give rise to some, significant tax savings in the future for the beneficiaries.
Well, on top of this then, on top of the strategies, the expertise that people, that executors can employ in the settlement of the estate, for estates as low as a couple $100,000. I don't know if it goes lower than that, Denny. Do you do something lower than that?
Rarely, because rarely do I see estates lower that just because of my practice.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll do some lower than that if the beneficiary has been a client of Mellon's forever and ever on then, and has built up, and there's no one else available, and they're older in dirt, and everybody else has died before them. And there's nobody else to step in.
So and yet
they may have started out with assets of $400,000 or $500,000, but because they've spent it down to $75,000, there's just nobody else left. I'm not going to leave that person in the lurch.
Okay, that's just due to your relationship with the people.
That's right, and of course we give them a fee break and all that sort of stuff.
Right. Well, I can say that if I were an executor, after listening to this conversation thus far in the first half of our show, I would not want to do all this stuff myself. And it would seem that for those that you can find who are capable of doing this stuff, they may also be very busy people doing other things in life, and their time is worth as much as your time, and it becomes a good deal for them to have professionals brought in to do it right the first time around, which probably is a shorter time. Let's come back. Let's take a break right now, and let's come back to the second half of our show and talk about some new topics.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 Estate Plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes. From A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at algibbons@algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940 or email algibbons@algibbons.com.
Math Power by Pat Kinshaft is the only math book I ever read that I couldn't put down, and I always had a lot of difficulty with math. My husband couldn't believe that I was reading a math book in bed. But Math Power had a lot of good ideas. It made me think about math in new ways, as patterns and as a language. Now I realize I should teach math equally with language. I've used a lot of the ideas from the book. For Christmas, I bought my children plastic measuring cups for the bath. They have a lot of fun measuring in the tub. When we cook, we emphasize math more since I read the book. I even made up a number song, and I sing it to my children when I put them to bed. It's amazing! Even I am enjoying math since I read Math Power, How to Help Your Child Love Math, even if you don't. You can enjoy it, too. Ask for Math Power by Pat Kinshaft at your local bookstore.